Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Ethan Rowling, and I'm the host of the Conversations with Chris and Ethan podcast. On this platform, we talk about various topics surrounding the Scott County Sheriff's Office and Chris's viewpoints on those topics. Through this platform, we hope that you will come to know Chris and his stances on these topics, and in doing so, we hope he can earn your vote. Chris is running in the Republican primary in June of 2024, and as a reminder, we're always looking to engage with the community and answer any questions you may have. So if you'd like us to address a specific topic on the podcast, feel free to reach out to any of our social media platforms. Previously, we talked about transformational leadership. Why don't we dive a little bit more into that and what it means?
Let's put a disclaimer and a disclosure out there. For those of you that are listening for the first time, or for those of you that have listened previously and are joining us again, keep in mind we are not professionals at this. We are amateurs. This was Ethan's great idea. And what we're referring to is doing these podcasts. We're amateurs at doing podcasts. So
I'd say calling this a podcast is even a stretch.
Okay.
We're having a conversation.
So Ethan, you're right. In one of the previous sessions, we talked about, we've been talking a lot about leadership and values and strategic plans and priorities and whatnot. But we had touched on transformational leadership. So I guess that's what we want to dive into, huh?
I think that's a good plan for this episode.
So I'm sure you heard it when you were in the military. I learned it while I was in the military. But when you become a first line supervisor in the military and you go through a primary leadership course, even before going to that course, you are learned the definition and explained what leadership is. And reverting back to my days in the military, leadership was defined as the process of influencing others to accomplish a mission by providing purpose, direction, and motivation, and while also improving the organization. So with that, there's several different types of leadership styles. One is known as transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is basically you recognize, that it's a matter of exchanges. You do a good job, I'm going to give you something in reward. So people work in order to be rewarded. That's transactional leadership. So the leader gets something, they get what their intent is, and the individual that's being led gets a reward. That's how we train our household pets, to do what we want them to do. Mm-hmm. Hey, you sit, I'll give you a reward.
Right.
So what my vision is to get away from transactional leadership and get into what's called transformational leadership. Transformational leadership is inspiring others to go above and beyond what they would normally do in order to accomplish a mission or to improve the organization, which kind of falls in line with how leadership is defined in the military.
Sure.
So that's how I was trained and how I was raised up in the military. So I would rather have people that want to show up to work, want to do the job, and want to go above and beyond just for self-accomplishment and accomplishment of the organization, rather than what are you going to give me in return?
Right.
So there's four components to transformational leadership. And those four components are individualized consideration, inspirational motivation, idealized influence, and intellectual stimulation. When we talk about inspirational motivation, and we've kind of touched on it in the past, is you give a vision, you give an intent, and you give what your guidelines are. And then the employees know your vision and they become part of that vision by being able to provide buy-in and feedback. And how can they be involved in making the organization a better place? So when you keep the goals of the organization and the vision of the organization something that's achievable, and the employees know that they can get there, then they're inspired to work harder to make sure that the organization gets there as a whole, and that they get there themselves individually as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It sounds like a mutually beneficial exercise is what I'm taking away from it. Because what's better for the agency as a whole is better for the individuals, and it's a...
So that's inspirational motivation. But when it comes, one of the other components, individualized consideration. And we've talked about this previously. What are the employees' concerns and needs? You are taking that person individually and considering what their desires and wants are and what their needs are so that they can become a better employee within the organization, and in doing that, make the organization a better place for everybody as a whole. We have to be able to change up our management styles and supervisory styles to each individual employee, so we're considering their needs so that we can accommodate what each individual employee needs or wants at the time. And there's numerous different types of management and supervisory styles out there, and not each individual will require the same type of management style. But also, when you get down to the individual at different points of time in their career or in their personal life, you might have to change your management style for that individual person based upon what they're going through at the time as well. Right. So if you're transformational, you can transform from one leadership or one management style to another in order to benefit that employee better.
So to me, this sounds like the other side or other argument against, well, we're going to do something this way because it's the way we've always done it. This sounds like it's a lot more open to the needs of those in the organization rather than the status quo of we've always done it this way. Why would we change it now?
Has society remained the same over the last decades or centuries?
No.
So then why would we?
I agree.
So the third component is idealized influence. Idealize. So let's break that down into ideals or ideas. Ideology is modeled off of ethical behavior. So we need to make sure our ethical behavior is morally and legally competent. And by doing that, we gain and increase our level of respect and trust with the employees when we act in a ideological behavior that is morally and ethically competent. So doing that, then it models to the employee, this is how we need to act within the workplace environment, and also how we need to act in our personal lives as well. So with that, when we get everybody acting in a manner that is morally and ethically competent, then it improves the ethics and morals of the organization as a whole. Intellectual stimulation, the fourth component. You are a very intellectual individual, Ethan.
Is that so?
You're always coming up with new ideas, and what you do is in your role at work. So before we delve into this, what personally stimulates your intellectual activity to make you want to do more?
Personally speaking, I like solving the puzzle.
Okay.
So I like finding a problem and then finding a solution to that problem. I guess it is as it applies to this thought process. I like making things better. So I like to improve on things and find more equitable and efficient ways to do things. Because if I can do that, then that will take some of the load off of other people and make them doing their jobs easier, which then in turn makes everything better for everybody.
So when you identify problems and you ask questions, so then you don't have any fear of taking a risk in order to find a solution to that problem. Okay, which is part of intellectual stimulation. And in a field of social sciences, we assume a lot and we make a lot of assumptions. Sometimes we have to challenge those assumptions in order to be able to take those risks and select and solicit input or ideas from employees in order to challenge those assumptions and come up with a solve for the problem.
Sure.
So by doing that, where we have in an environment where we have a safe place where we can have a continued conversation and we can be creative and voice diversity in our problem solving techniques, then we stimulate everybody's intellectual sense to be able to think through a problem and come up with a unified solution to solve that issue. So that's how we build on the fourth component of transformational leadership as far as intellectual stimulation. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, to me it sounds like you're teaching people how to think for themselves.
Yeah. And find a solution. Right. Don't always complain about what's wrong. Hey, if
act on it.
Act on it. If you see an issue, identify the issue, come up with a list of solutions to solve the issue, and then have a conversation about it. Say, hey, I see this is going on. How can we make this better? Here's 4 different actions we could take to possibly make this better. Let's get buy-in from everybody and see what the consensus is. And then once we have a consensus, let's implement it to see if we actually solve the problem.
Right.
Make sense?
Perfect sense.
Okay. So the other part of a transformational leader, there's 5 traits that successful transformational leaders have in common. 1, they always practice self-awareness. They thrive on personal growth. They know their strengths and know their weaknesses. They reflect daily or weekly on the activities that they've participated in throughout that time period. And they always think that others, along with themselves, should always continuously be educating or growing and learning in their profession to make themselves a better person. The second attribute or the second trait that they would have is they're open-minded. They're, it's my way. That's the only way we're going to do it. You've got no input to it. No, they're open-minded. Bring me your ideas. Bring me your thoughts. Let's not jump to any conclusions, but let's sit down and have a conversation about it. Get feedback. Get ideas from everybody. And then, if we have a range of ideas, which ones make more sense to be able to implement to achieve a strategic plan. The third trait, you need to be adaptive and innovative. And I'm sure you've heard this in the military, adapt and overcome. Mm-hmm. We hear it in the civilian sector as well. So what does adapt and overcome mean to you?
So adapt and overcome to me means exactly what it sounds like. If there's an issue in front of you, rather than just saying, I hit this brick wall, we might as well just stop. Or, I know that something that happens to us a lot is we'll have this scenario happen, and it'll happen multiple times, and we'll say, well, we're going to do it this way because this is the way we've always done it. And I'm sure that that's not just a law enforcement thing. That's a probably societal answer for a lot of other professions. But this is the way we've always done it. And I hate that phrase because just because that's the way it was done for a long time doesn't always mean that that's the right way. Sometimes there's proven concepts and reasons that that is the way that things are done, but that doesn't mean that's the way it has to be done, because sometimes there's a better way to do something. And adaptation is more than just coming up with new stuff. It's tweaking things to make them more efficient. A great example is just looking at the evolution of squad cars. Like, there's so many different things that you can do with vehicles nowadays that they didn't used to do. And if we just took this is the way we've always done it back to when, it was just a little siren and a little bubble light on top of the car. Well, this is the way we've done it. There's a reason that we now have, essentially as many lights as what a spaceship would have on our vehicles, because, people would get hit while they're standing on the side of the road helping people, or people would say, I can't see the lights or whatever. So we would adapt and evolve and say, okay, this is what we can do to that. They have special sirens now that are pointed down at the ground that we can put on vehicles to actually cause reverberations in the pavement. So when you're coming up on people that are hearing impaired, they can still feel that and actually move over to the side of the road. That's another adaptation and innovation that never would have come about if everybody had just had the mindset that this is the way we've always done it and just maintained that. And speaking as somebody that's experienced like those specific things benefiting me and making my job easier and safer, I'm wholeheartedly a supporter of innovating and moving on. Now, that doesn't always mean that everything we try is going to work out, but having the courage to at least try it, I think, is important.
No, you're absolutely right. And that is almost a textbook example and reasoning of what being adaptable and innovative is all about. The fourth trait of a good transformational leader is being proactive. We see it many times in this profession that we react to everything. We have got to get out of the mindset of sitting back and just waiting to respond to calls for service. You can't always be reactive. When incidents occur and when issues happen, of course, we have to react appropriately to those. But a lot of times being proactive and getting ahead of an incident or an issue, and I'm not speaking criminally here, I'm speaking as far as in a leadership realm and guiding employees. If we're proactive in those employees' lives and we're getting ahead of providing resources and programs to the employees to assist them to better themselves and make them healthier in their profession, then a lot of times we don't have to react to cause and effect down the road. Example, being proactive and building a good mental well-being and mental health program into the system to benefit all employees who are exposed to trauma as a first responder is definitively positive when it comes to assisting them in their mental well-being down the road. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's the first and best example that I could come up with on that concept. The way that I see it, one of the best areas that we can take to be proactive in, I guess, the leadership realm like you said, in law enforcement, we tend to be reactive with everything. And to a certain extent, our conversation about mental health is reactive in nature because we've worked in this field long enough that we've seen the negative effects that it's had on our friends and coworkers, which has caused us to have this conversation. And it's unfortunate that it's reactive in nature, but part of being a good leader is noticing when something is wrong and then addressing it accordingly. I think that being proactive in specifically mental health, which is the first thing that came to mind when you brought that up, is because it's such a low buy-in with such a high payoff. So for the leaders to take an invested interest in their subordinates, to make sure that they're doing okay and set the building blocks in place to actually tell them how to deal with things and create an environment where they feel safe to come to their leaders if something happens and explain these situations to them to actually get help. In reality, it doesn't take that much. All you have to do is be invested in your people, and let them know that you honestly care, and they'll come to you and they'll do that. And it just takes a little bit of proactivity on your end.
And I think down the road later on in these series, we'll have a more in-depth conversation into mental well-being and the mental health of employees and how we can change the environment and assist those that, are struggling at times. And like you said, being proactive to make sure that we have the resources in place to assist them before they get to that point. And I think we could also in the future talk about tier structured mental health support in organizations and talk about the different tiers and, what is the bottom of the barrel acceptable standard and what is this is the epitome of mental health resources and programs in an organization to assist people with that. We could go down. We could have a very long and extensive conversation on that. But moving on, the last trait, the fifth trait of a good transformational leader is to lead with humility. Being able to stand up and saying, I don't know the answer or I don't have the answer for everything, is perfectly okay. A leader's not going to know everything about everything. I had spoken about, previously, where when I got to Iraq, there was new equipment that I knew nothing about. So I grabbed the most junior employee in my unit and had her teach me how to use this communication equipment because I'd never seen it before. Going to that junior employee and her having the opportunity and the ability to train me on that equipment did so much for her self-esteem and for, positive reinforcement in her work environment that she became more competent in the fact that she could execute her mission with a more positive outcome. So while we can remain confident and steadfast in our goals and abilities, it's also okay to say, I don't have all the answers, but do you know where to go to find the answers?
Right. And I know that a lot of times in specifically the law enforcement realm, we have a tendency to take on everything and at least put forth the appearance that we know everything, because that's what the community expects of us. They call us in their worst times, and you're the frontline person that is supposed to solve whatever issues in front of you. And while most of the times we have a really good poker face about it, and our extensive experiences in a lot of different situations can lead us to the path that we should take, we don't know everything. But using each other, there's not many experiences that are going to be unique enough that none of us have experienced something similar, and we can draw on each other with that. Were you going to say something?
Well, and it's kind of so the fifth characteristic kind of goes back to support the first characteristic about self-awareness. Leaders who always walk around thumping their chest and thinking that they're the know-all be-all, while not demonstrating that in their actions, are boosting their egos. We don't need ego boosters in leadership. And by supporting self-awareness, we had talked about continuously educating and improving yourself. If you're a leader who has continuously educated yourself and improved yourself, and I'll use this as an example, studying case law, reading ordinances, reading state codes, reading federal codes, educating yourself on the judicial process, being confident in the fact that you know what the correct answer is not boosting your ego. It's because you have done your research and you have educated yourself on what that information really is. Somebody who boosts their ego just simply wants to argue or debate on hollow facts that is based on their opinion, not based on what the actual information really is.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that, in a nutshell, is what transformational leadership is all about. As a transformational leader, you can have a positive impact on an organization and on each individual employee, thus making everything better, more effective, and more efficient. And that's where we want to go with the Scott County Sheriff's Office.